We appreciate you taking the time to learn and connect with us during these crazy days. And as you're coming in, we want to welcome you and also direct you to the chat panel. And when you go to the chat panel, we'd love for you to select all panelists and attendees so that as you're sharing content with the others who are on this call, everyone can see your comments. So if you could take a quick moment and in the chat panel, shout out where you are today in the world, and we also have this daily prompt to share what you're grateful for. So we would love to hear in the chat something that you're grateful for as we're looking to focus on what's positive in a very challenging time. So thank you for being here. Hi, Rob in Delaware. We would invite all of you to use the drop down for all panelists and attendees and share with us where you're calling in from and potentially something for which you are grateful today. I am grateful today to have Rich Brandt here of RDR Group, and I'm going to introduce him to you in a few minutes. Just so you know, this is a series. Today is the first in several webinar events with various authors and thought leaders, and each day I'll be sending out an email in the morning that will alert you to the next day's guests and topics, and included in that daily email will be links and resources from the guest from the day before. So you're going to want to make sure you check your inboxes daily. However, we are using this same link in Zoom every day. Now there's one exception. We do have several full-length webinars, including one with Rich in the next few weeks. And for those days, you will register in Zoom as always, and you'll receive a specific link for that day's events. And on those days, we may be varying from the 12 p.m. Eastern start time. So a couple of more notes as we're getting started. If you'd like to share socially today while you're participating in this event, we would encourage you to use the hashtag #TheDailyConnection. Also, Erica is going to put in the chat a link where you can send your friends who might want to sign up for this series. I'm thrilled that we already have 400 people signed up for the series, and we would love to see that number grow as more people discover the encouragement and resources that we're sharing through this series. So if you would take the link that Erica's putting in chat and share it with your networks, we would love to have them participate. You know, my email this morning did say that we would be broadcasting on Facebook Live, and we are unable to do so. There seems to be a technical glitch. However, we do want to invite you to join our Facebook group for this series, and Erica will put that link into the chat. And when you join the Facebook group, you'll have a place to stay connected to all the people who are participating in this series, along with the experts and authors who are presenting. So this is the daily connection, and just because your life may feel like it's on hold, it doesn't mean that your learning has to be. Again, I want to encourage you to share in the chat if you can share anything that you're grateful about, share where you're calling in from, and I love seeing all those responses. We are going to grab those responses and share some of them out to you in Facebook later. But since we only have a half an hour for today's event, we want to jump straight to the content. Again, I'm pleased to be hosting today Rich Brandt. Rich is one of the principals of RDR Group. RDR Group works within organizations to provide valuable training to help people improve connections, and some of their topics are diversity and inclusion and resilience and customer service, and you can find out more about them at their website, rdrgroup.com. So welcome, Rich. Can't wait to dive in.
Me too.
So let's take a look today, and as we get started, you know, it's obvious to all of us the pandemonium that is existing in our world today. And, you know, people are freaking out to various degrees. You know, I happen to have my college freshman daughter come home as college students across America are being asked to leave dorms. And I have to admit, when I got the text on Friday in the middle of our webinar that I needed to get my daughter out as soon as possible, I was a little bit freaked out. So Rich, I know that you and RDR Group have spent decades helping people manage their stress. So what advice can you give people to help them to turn down the volume and not go into full-blown panic as the news continues to get worse?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to say that I'm profoundly sympathetic with anyone who is struggling with fear and anxiety right now. I think that you know, it's fairly pervasive with just the people that I've encountered. In fact, I've had to work really hard myself to not give in to a deep pessimism over what the future may look like. But I think that it would help to make a distinction between concern and panic. So if we think of concern as, giving something importance, and panic as kind of uncontrollable fear and anxiety, concern can be helpful. Panic, on the other hand, is both unhealthy and unhelpful. And here's the main reason why. Fear and panic change our brain. And the brain on the left is a brain that's depressed, and it's flooded with what's called cortisol hormone that is released when we go into a stress response. And one of the functions of cortisol is it also activates certain changes in our body. Our heart races, our breathing changes, blood pressure changes, blood sugar changes, gastric acid is released in the stomach, and it blocks or inhibits the production of these positive neurochemicals. And the brain on the right, which is fully functional, and of course we need that when we're going through times like this, is flooded with positive neurochemicals like endorphins and dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin. And really that's what I want to discuss today, is how can we create the brain on the right to be able to be best positioned to handle what's going on, and also to maintain a sense of well-being in the midst of adversity while staving off fear that would otherwise consume us. And I think it begins with a proper understanding of what stimulates the production of positive neurochemicals, or what brings happiness. And I think that's one of the challenges with many Americans today, is that we've had a relatively easy life, myself included. I've enjoyed good health. We can travel when we want to, eat out a few days a week, have discretionary income. And we've enjoyed comfort for so long that I think it's easy for us to associate happiness with favorable circumstances. And that wasn't true of our ancestors. I think for many of us, if we think back to our parents or grandparents, they had hard lives. They worked hard jobs. They didn't have a lot. They didn't get a chance to travel that much or to go out to eat very frequently unless it was a special occasion. And not to get too morbid, but they didn't even have the internet or Netflix. But they went through things like world wars and economic depression. And I remember my wife's grandmother talking about how they all lived together, 3 families in a 2-flat. She was married, her sister was married. They all moved in with their mother to share food and rent and that sort of thing. And the point is they knew how to stay happy in spite of circumstances. For our generation, circumstances are generally good and adversity is more episodic. So it's a little bit more challenging for us. But what I want to do is talk about what brings happiness to kind of clarify the confusion. And I think I have a poll question that I just wanted people to kind of answer in the chat bar. And if you want to just go ahead and read that, Becky, maybe we can start with that.
And I've got to remember to unmute. I have, all my kids here, so I don't want everyone to be listening to my background noise. So the question is in the chat, not as a poll: where do Americans look for happiness? And we would love to hear your comments on that. So if you can take a moment and type in chat, where do Americans look for happiness? Now, I do want to acknowledge there may be some people from around the world on the call, and we're interested in what you have to say as well. So where do people in the world look for happiness? And if you're an American, comment on that. So
well, I also want to kind of talk about the American culture. Like what are we, newsprint, advertising, TV, what are the messages that we're getting in terms of where we should look for happiness? So even I think people from outside America might have an interesting perspective on how they look at Americans and the pursuit of happiness. So.
Thank you for clarifying that, Rich. So I have a few comments here: family and friends, external things, success as a position, faith, family, wealth. Here's a comment: maybe this crisis will help us return to looking for happiness within ourselves, our families, and hobbies. Making a difference, the quality of relationships, friendships, laughter. Thanks to all of those of you who are answering.
Okay, and I probably
watching funny cat videos on YouTube.
I probably made a little bit of a mistake in terms of framing the question the wrong way, because I think some of them got it in terms of looking at the externals. What I was interested in is what people think will make them happy. So when I ask in that way, most people say money. So most people think if I have more money, I'd be happy. If I just had a bigger house, if I had a new car, maybe if I could get a tummy tuck or, a Botox, or, if I had a different job. So this idea, like someone mentioned about the externals, looking at measuring our success and our status to bring happiness. I think if we're honest, most of us at times give into that myth that that's important to our happiness. The people who mention friends and family, as we're going to see later, they're kind of hitting on the real answer, because what I want to share with you is what researchers have found in terms of what really brings happiness. It's different than most people think. The externals are circumstantial, and a change in circumstances only accounts for 10% of our happiness. And one of the reasons for that is that when let's say we buy a new car, or we get a raise in pay, there's something called hedonic adaptation. We get used to the pleasure it brings. So after a few months, it's just another car. Or, how many people have said, oh, once we move into this house, we'll be happy forever. And then, you end up with 3 girls and a dog, and you think, oh, we've outgrown this place. And so circumstances are a temporary happiness. What really brings happiness for people is, first of all, your genes. 50% is what they call a set point, your genetic makeup. And if you have maybe mental illness in your family, you don't have to freak out and think, oh, I'm doomed. It doesn't mean that you won't enjoy happiness. But there is some genetics to the levels of happiness that we can enjoy. But one of the things that was really surprising in the research was that 40% of happiness is intentional activities, things that we either do or don't do. And that's what I want to talk about today. There are things that you can do to stimulate those positive neurochemicals in your brain that many people may look at as trite or trivial, and they may be doing the wrong things in terms of trying to find happiness. And this goes back to, I think, the early to mid 90s, when some of the luminaries in the field of psychology said, what if we did something different? What if, instead of studying mental disorder, which is what most psychologists have done for the last 100 years, what if we looked at well-being? What if we studied happy people for a change? What's unique about those people who are able to enjoy happiness, long-term, sustainable happiness in spite of circumstances? What are they doing that's different from the other 80%? And they, after studying the question and looking for commonalities, they came up with a list of 12 things that they committed to clinical trials, just like you would a drug. So they had a control group and a test group to make sure that, yes, this actually does increase happiness. And that's what I'm going to share to you today real quickly, are the 12 things that can increase happiness and well-being in our life. The first one is happy people, those 20%. They don't overthink things, they live in the moment. And I think in one of the webinars we did before, I talked a little bit about rumination, where some people have a terrible habit of dwelling on certain thoughts that are negative, that bring about the production of cortisol. And you might ask the question, well, where else could I live but in the moment? But the truth is, a lot of people are either living in the past, or worse, right now, they're living in the future. In other words, they're living in their imagination. They're not dealing with what's real and in front of them. They're kind of off in their head, thinking about certain things that are negative and gloomy. And of course, that triggers the bad neurochemistry. So what we mean by living in the moment is really, I think, 2 things that can really help us to do this. One, as strange as it might seem to some people, is practicing some form of meditation, which is not just a Buddhist or Hindu thing. The Christian meditation was around from the beginning. Atheists can meditate, because all we're talking about is learning to spend maybe 10 minutes a day in silence, learning to just control your thoughts rather than allowing your thoughts to control you. So typically it involves just focusing on your breath. Your thoughts will kind of be there, especially now. And what you're going to try to do is to let those thoughts go by without attaching to them, and just keep coming back to the breath for 5 to 10 minutes. And it's helping you to disassociate the meaning of your life with all these thoughts that bombard us. It's a great discipline. The other thing that I would say helps with living in the moment is mindfulness. In other words, when you're doing something, really be present and focus in on one thing at a time. So that's the first thing that I would suggest to kind of stimulate the good, positive neurochemistry. The other is focusing on opportunities rather than the difficulties. And so this has to do with being an optimist rather than being a pessimist.
So Rich, I want to pause for a minute because it seems like some people on the call might think it's naive to hear you say, you know, just be positive, everything's going fine, you know, just don't worry about it, when there are major issues that we're facing, you know, including likely for some on the call, people who are now out of work as a result of this crisis. So what do you say, Rich, to people who suggest that optimism is just wishful thinking?
Well, I try to use the example, which I know I used in the resilience class when we did the other webinar, but I used the example of US Airways Flight 1549 with Chesley Sullenberger. And I tell people, okay, if you're in an airplane and a flock of birds just knocked out both engines and you've got just a few seconds before you're going to hit the ground, who do you want in the cabin or, you know, the cockpit? Do you want an optimist or a pessimist? Because a pessimist is going to think, I should have been a dentist. You know, why did I want to be a pilot? We're doomed. And maybe they're just going to, you know, say their prayers as the plane goes down. But optimism is in a bad situation, being able to be realistic and say, this is bad. What can I do about it? So that's what I mean by focusing on the opportunities. Is, as someone said, you know, an optimist is someone who sees in every adversity an equal or greater opportunity. So it's a matter of kind of looking at things differently. And here's one of the tools that we share with our clients to be able to do that. We call it TREC Analysis, which is simply an acronym for these 4 stages of kind of processing your thoughts differently. So rather than giving into panic, what you do is you say, what's the triggering event? And just objectively say, well, I was watching the news and they mentioned the coronavirus is up to 5,000 people. What's important to realize is the fact that the coronavirus is up to 5,000 people does not cause stress. What causes stress is how we think about it. And that's the rationalization part. We really need to pay attention to how we explain it to ourselves. And if we think, oh my God, you know, it's going to affect our whole community, and we're going to run out of toilet paper, and, you know, we're going to starve, and I'm going to lose my job. And even if you do lose your job and you tell yourself, oh my gosh, that means I'm going to be homeless, I'm going to be on the street, it's how you talk to yourself that really makes the difference. So what I tell people is to look at the effects. Look at the effects of negative thinking. Are you happy with that? Because for most people, it's very negative. You know, they get an ulcer, they have headaches, they get more short-tempered, and they bite their nails, and they eat more food than they should, or they drink or smoke or whatever. So that's supposed to provide a little bit of incentive for you to do the 4th step, which is, can you bring some clarity to this? Can you calm down and look at the situation a little bit more objectively and say, okay, here's what we're facing. We're facing a pandemic. There are things that we can do. We can wash our hands, we can social distance. You know, if I lose my job, I can collect unemployment benefits. I can move in with, you know, my brother. Just trying to calm yourself down, but reframing things, which is what clarification is all about. Taking a step back, taking a few breaths, and trying to think of it differently is very helpful to kind of getting out of that fight or flight mode. The third thing that happy people have in common, who are able to stay happy even in spite of adversity. And this is how you started your webinar, and I'm grateful you did. But it was interesting that it made the list. Happy people are grateful. And it isn't just it isn't something like just an attitude. They actually count their blessings. So one of the things I would recommend for people who are struggling right now is before you go to bed, this was actually one of the clinical trials, before you go to bed, keep a little journal next to your bedstand, write down 2 things that you're grateful for before you go to sleep. It'll also help you sleep a little better. And by day 7 or so, you get really creative and you realize there's so much to be thankful for. My wife and I took a walk the other day, when we were kind of feeling a little bit of panic because we went to the store and we saw how, just pandemonium was reigning. We decided to take a walk, and the sunshine, and, we live in Florida, of course, the sunshine and the fresh air and the trees and the birds just kind of helped us to recalibrate. So learning to be grateful is a really important step in being able to stem the flow of fear and anxiety. And one that I really enjoy that made the list is savoring the good. When I think of savoring something, I think of food, like my favorite desserts or your favorite dishes. I worked in the restaurant business for a long time, and the ritual of serving wine, I'll never forget how they would swirl the glass and smell the bouquet. And, it was like this big deal, especially if it was an expensive bottle of wine. But learning to savor everything. For instance, my wife and I, we try to, if we wake up at similar times, we try to cuddle a little bit before we start our day. Just that little bit of, before we just jump out of bed, just taking a few minutes to enjoy togetherness and cuddling. I mean, as silly as it sounds, learning to pay attention to the sun when it's on your face, hugging your kids a little longer. But what they say is that the neurons that fire together wire together. So if you want to be able to have good neurochemistry, you need to sit with something good that happens to you about 5 seconds to let it download. The 5th thing that made the list, which might be unsettling for people who don't consider themselves religious, is practicing spirituality. But I want to stress that this is not necessarily tied to religion. For some it is, but spirituality is finding meaning and purpose in your life, seeing life as being something greater than just, getting up and doing your thing and going to bed every day, but you see there's a purpose or meaning. And I just wanted to ask a poll question here to find out how many would consider themselves spiritual in the sense that they believe in something. There's something more to this world that gives them meaning and purpose.
Sure. So I have put the poll up. The question seems to be cut off, but it says, how many of you would consider yourself spiritual? You believe there is something more to this world that gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. So if you can take a moment to answer that poll question, and we'll give you a few more seconds to do that.
You've probably heard, Becky, that one of the fastest growing affiliations when they ask people their religious affiliation is called nuns, which means they don't affiliate with a religion. They consider themselves spiritual, but not religious, particularly among young people. And I think it's approaching 20%. So I'm just curious how many people, either because of their religion or because they just find other ways to be spiritual, consider themselves more spiritual than not.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. Some of you are saying that you can't see it, but I appreciate some of the comments in chat. And some people are saying, in response to your comments, Rich, I see some people saying, yes, I consider myself spiritual, or I consider myself both, or religious more than spiritual. So I'm going to show those results. It looks like 95% of the people on the call.
Okay, that's what I was actually thinking.
Consider themselves spiritual.
Really, yeah. Mm-hmm. And religion to me is just a vehicle to, to be able to kind of enter that spiritual path in terms of, recognizing there's something larger. But the studies show that, this is based on the happiness study, which the World Health Organization, I think, sponsored and put in $30 million. Major universities across the globe were involved. But it just, the sense of significance that it brings, and even the sense of community with sharing that with other people, really does help with happiness. And the very last thing that I want to talk about in terms of taking care of ourselves is people who take care of their body, exercising, My wife's a yoga therapist, and she always emphasizes to me the importance of movement. You know, that if we're just moving, that can really help in terms of the not only blood flow, but obviously good brain chemistry as well. In fact, while I mentioned my wife, it made me think of something that I forgot earlier. For those of you who are dealing with anxiety, she recommended what they call 4-7-8 technique of breathing, and you can look it up online. Dr. Weil, I think, is the person that kind of came up with that, but it really can help in terms of calming your fears and helping you to get a good night's sleep. But exercise and even eating right is good for your brain chemistry, particularly vigorous exercise, because it stimulates endorphins.
That was 4-7-8, Rich?
4-7-8, right.
Okay, thanks.
So these are 6 things you can do to kind of help change your neurochemistry in a more positive way.
So, Rich, with everything that you've shared with us so far, that suggests that happiness is really about self-care. And I have to tell you, the thing about movement resonates with me so much. I've been training this spring for 2 marathons, and they both got canceled, of course. But I still have to keep going because running is such a stress relief for me. So,
yeah.
There's my plug for movement. So, you know, if happiness is all about self-care, managing our thoughts, emotions, and health, where does this factor that our family and friends contribute to our happiness come in?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because that made the study too. And in fact, they said it was the most important thing. Leaning on others is one of the things that happy people have in common. And that doesn't surprise me, because I'm sure, like many of the 95% who consider themselves spiritual, I'm convinced that love is the key to happiness. So, you know, try to enjoy at this time, especially since many of us are self-isolating. You know, enjoy your spouse and your friends and your kids and even your pets. Skype, Marco Polo, FaceTime, text, because it's a wonderful way to stimulate the positive neurochemicals. The 2 other things real quickly that are part of relationships that stimulate the well-being: acts of kindness, being thoughtful. When we engage in a random act of kindness, our happiness spikes 8 times more than the person that we're doing the act of kindness to. So helping other people at a time like this can really be good for us in terms of staying in the right frame of mind. And the last thing in terms of relationships is forgiveness. It's really important to learn to let go of things that we might be harboring against other people for our own sake. It's not about letting the other person off the hook. In fact, they found if you write a letter of forgiveness to people who've hurt you, even if you don't mail it, it helps you to increase your happiness. So it's about letting go of those toxic chemicals like cortisol when we tend to be bitter and unforgiving. The last 2 things that made the list, I call this talent management. Pursue goals. The pursuit of goals releases dopamine. It's not the achievement of goals, it's just a pursuit. So, you know, it's just daily trying to like do something that's inching you towards something that you want for yourself. And it could be physical, financial, or just in terms of developing talents. The last thing is staying challenged, like pushing yourself, mastering something. So if you enjoy running, run. If you enjoy drums like I do, drum. You know, my wife enjoys art. So pushing yourself to do something that you want to get better at, those things create the flow of these positive neurochemicals as well. One thing I want to say in closing is just to kind of give you a visual of this. These things won't change what's happening, but it can change your perception of what's happening. So I've got one final poll. I want people to count the number of F's in this sentence, and I'm going to give you about 15 seconds for that.
And I've launched the poll. So if you can select how many F's do you see in the sentence, how many do you count? Somewhere between 2 and 8.
Blocking the slide?
You know, this maybe.
Okay. It is for me. I don't know whether it is.
Okay, how's that? Maybe I'll give people a chance to count, and then I'll move it back. How does that work?
That's what I would do. Yeah.
Okay. So somewhere between 2 and 8, or if you can't see, I've got it slid back. You can also type it in the chat, and we'll give you a few more seconds to do your counting.
And I'm going to blank the screen so that I didn't want to give them more than 15 seconds. That's what.
Got it. Okay.
the
So
exercise.
now people can see. If you can't see the poll, please feel free to type your number in the chat. And that sentence has gone away, so you would not be able to see it. The screen is black. So I'm going to quickly end the poll, and we've got a wide range of numbers that people counted. Most people counted 5. I see some 4s, some 8s, some 7s, some 6s in the chat.
Okay. Well, here's the thing. Some people count 4 or 5 a couple times in a row. If you can close the poll, I can't see but if you look closely, the word of appears twice in the second sentence and twice in the last sentence, and most people miss that every time. So there's finished files, scientifically and carefully. But when I do this in a large group, the overwhelming majority get 4 or 5 and they miss the ofs. And what I wanted to try and just encourage people to do is to recognize that even without changing what's happening, you can change your perception of things or see things differently by doing these 12 activities that will encourage the production of positive neurochemistry. It gives you a different look at life, and it allows you to kind of focus on the things that are good so that you can enjoy happiness instead of fear and anxiety.
Thank you so much, Rich. And thank you to all of you who joined us today. I hope you'll take a minute after today's call to learn more about Rich and his brother Ralph and the work that they are doing at RDR Group. And I hope you'll join us tomorrow. We are going to be talking about gaining strength and resilience with Jeannie Cockle and Joan MacArthur Blair, and they have written a book about creating hope and resilience, and it's exactly on target for the times that we're facing. I will be in your inbox tomorrow morning with links from today and a preview of tomorrow's content, and you can have more conversation and connection with us in the Facebook group. Sorry about that. Erica can give you a link for the Facebook group. She can also give you a link that you can share with colleagues. There were about 60 of us on today's call out of the 400 signups that we had. We expect over the series to get momentum. We hope you'll bring someone with you tomorrow if they can gain encouragement and support from this series. And just a quick note, my company, Weaving Influence, specializes in providing digital marketing and media support for authors, thought leaders, and training consulting companies. Most of the time on webinars like this, we don't talk a lot about us, but we wanted to make sure that you are aware of who we are and what we do in the world. In addition to partnering with authors, thought leaders, and training consulting companies, we also serve nonprofits and other purpose-driven organizations. So in the event that we can be of help to you in executing your digital marketing strategies, I'm going to invite you to email me, and Erica will put that in the chat as well. I am Becky at weavinginfluence.com. I feel like I know many of you. You've been in my email inboxes, and we've been interacting in the chat, and we love having you here with us. So until we see you tomorrow, take good care and stay healthy and safe.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Becky.